Hey there, everyone. This is Samuel Johnson, and welcome back to the Lyoko Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episode 60 of Code Lyoko Temporary Insanity. And in this episode, Ulrich and Odd go nuts. Sort of. Basically, what happens is that in this episode, Ulrich, while the group is in Carthage trying to get some information, trying to get access to backup data to try and get a lock on Franz Hopper, the Ulrich and Odd get zapped by something. Basically, they're fighting a group of mantas, and essentially everybody in the group of Sans Ilita is reduced down to so many enough life points that one more hit will cause them to be devirtualized. Yumi gets zapped herself, but as Ulrich and Odd are fighting off the remaining two mantas, they come together and blast them and hit them with a very special beam. Well, it does devirtualize them. It doesn't do it right away, as in the beginning they are glowing red before they get zapped out. While they're able to still get the data that they need to find Franz, they want to know exactly what happened to the Ulrich and Odd, since it took a while for them to be devirtualized. However, unfortunately, they got to kind of put a pin in that as they're late for the rehearsals that that Cadec teacher Rick is planning, as he's essential as they're going to be performing in it, and it's essentially just like an open performance. While it is just practice for the final thing, ultimately people are allowed to come in, see the show, and just and in the case of Nicholas, heckle the people on stage. As such, they end up going to the performance, but they go to the performance, or they are in the performance. They're practicing. Sorry, jumbling. While Odd is saying his lines, he suddenly just stands up and blurts out laser arrow and acts like he's getting ready to shoot things. While Yumi's able to bring him back to reality for like a second, he immediately goes back to it, and Ulrich starts joining him, and we see why they're going nuts. From their perspective, they're not in the gym. They're in the ice sector, and the teachers and the teachers and the students, they look like the monsters from Lyoko. Because of this, they think they're essentially in the middle of battle. While they are able to perceive of Aelita and Yumi because they're their allies, unfortunately they see them as their Lyoko selves, and when Jeremy talks to them, it's the typical Jeremy overhead omnipresent voice that you would get when they're in Lyoko, so they can't perceive him. Although what I find kind of amusing is that they showcase that while they see everybody in the real world as monsters from Lyoko, they can still hear them. So I'm just kind of wondering why they don't question the fact that the monsters can suddenly talk and why they sound like their teachers. Well, actually, scratch that. When the principal ends up talking, they see him as a block, and even Ulrich's like, hey, why does he sound like the principal? I'm just thinking to myself, like, that doesn't raise a few eyebrows. Unfortunately, though, irregardless, they are, because of how crazy they're acting, the school eventually, and because they do almost attempt to assault the teachers, they get carted off and sent to the hospital. Because, well, this is clearly a problem. As such, Jeremy, Tassa, Alita, and Yumi would go following them to the hospital and seeing what happened, and Jeremy will go and check it out. And Jeremy will check out what happened when they got devirtualized. As such, we see them at the hospital as the nurse is interviewing them, and what's actually kind of amusing is that at one point Ulrich is assaulting her, but she just easily dispatches him because she knows Taekwondo. But Jeremy's able to do the scan, and yeah, essentially, and whatever was in that blast, it scrambled with their heads. And as for whatever reason, they are now going to be stuck thinking they're in Lyoko. Jeremy, thankfully, says he can create a counter program and get them back to normal, but to do that, he needs to get them to an away tower on Lyoko. And unfortunately for him, just as he's doing this, Xana launches an attack on the core. As such, Yumi and Aelita do manage to break Ulrich and Odd out of the hospital, and they do manage to get them to the factory. With Jeremy able to trick them into going to the scanners because he says go into the away tower. As such, everybody gets sent to Lyoko, and they ultimately end up splitting up, with Yumi going to Carthage while Aelita is tasked with getting Ulrich and Odd to the away tower. But unfortunately, when they're on Lyoko, there's another problem. And while they're there, they think they're at Ulrich and Odd think they're at Caddick. And as such, when Aelita and Ulrich and Odd keep running forward and eventually run into a trio of monsters, in this case a tarantula and two Cankrolites, Ulrich and Odd see them as Sissy, Nicholas, and Herb, which admittedly I think is kind of amusing because they still perceive them as a threat, just not as serious. Unfortunately, because of this, they're almost made sitting ducks by the Cankrolites and the tarantula. It's only because of Aelita's quick thinking that they manage to survive. But eventually, in the meantime, still goes to Carthage and manages to get through everything to eventually get to the core, and she does manage to try and fend off one of the monsters attacking them, because in this case it's three mantas. But unfortunately, she still gets devirtualized. Thankfully, by that point, Aelita managed to finally get Ulrich and Odd to the away tower by essentially just saying, "You are going to follow me whether you like it or not." Essentially, just bringing the boot down, and they do manage to get to the away tower, and Jeremy does manage to fix them, allowing them to run out to go to Carthage, and then eventually they go to Carthage and taking out the last monsters before they're able to destroy the core of Lyoko. Though in this episode's case, the monsters get incredibly gets closer than they have before, as they're able to destroy both the protective barriers around the core, and the only reason Lyoko isn't completely destroyed is because just as the Manta is about to shoot one last blast at the core, Aelita was able to get in the way and intercept the blast before hitting it with one of her energy spheres. So yeah. As such, the episode ends with them all getting devirtualized, Ulrich and Odd back to normal, and because, again, the hospital is looking for Ulrich and Odd since they got broken out, Jeremy has to launch a Return to the Past, so... Yeah, okay, yeah. Otherwise, yeah, it's just another filler episode, but to give credit where it's due, it's an interesting premise. Again, it's another example of Xana using subterfuge to try subterfuge and misdirection to get what he wants. In this case, he has the monsters infect the two members of the group with something that'll cause them to go crazy. In this case, whatever he did to make them hallucinate, or make Ulrich and Odd hallucinate. And while the group is too busy dealing with that, then he can launch an attack on the core of Lyoko, which I think was, still a solid plan. And to give credit where it's due, I do actually kind of like seeing Ulrich and Odd thinking they're in Lyoko, as it kind of is amusing seeing them and how they interpret everything. I think one problem that I can kind of think of the premise is that I kind of would have liked to have seen the group try to explain this to Ulrich and Odd. Like, at some point they tell them, "Look, Xana's done something to you. We're not actually in Lyoko, we're in the real world. That actually is the principle." I think that would have been interesting, because I think it would have been, because it kind of would have been nice to just see how they react to everything, knowing that from their perspective, it's all a threat, while everyone else, it's normal. In fact, at one point, while they're running to the factory, there's a hospital, there's like an ambulance a police car chasing after them, and Ulrich thinks it's a mega tank, so he goes in to intercept it, but then the only reason he doesn't get run over is because the car swerves to avoid him and intercepts oncoming traffic. So I kind of would have liked to have seen more of that and just kind of see more from their perspective and how they react to everything. I think it would have been actually pretty interesting, especially if things had actually been explained. But to be fair, considering that when they went to Lyoko, they immediately thought they were back at Caddick, it kind of makes me think that even if they explained it to them, they would have thought that that Aelita and Yumi were crazy. But I think maybe Jeremy could have, I don't know. You could make the argument that they wouldn't have believed them. And based on what happened when they went to Lyoko, how they immediately thought they were back at Caddick without having any memory of how they got there. Yeah, you can probably make the argument that whatever Xana did scramble with their senses and memories to the point where they probably can think of an excuse as to why they're something like that. Although you can make the argument that they thought they did a Return of the Past, so whatever. Again, I think it would have been interesting too if I just feel like that someone could have said something, because I think it would have been more interesting to see more from their perspective of what represented what. Like maybe see more, like see what people which were certain monsters. Like for example, when they started hallucinating, they actually saw Jim as a crab and the principal as a box, which I think is kind of amusing since the crab is objectively the stronger of the two monsters. So that's kind of funny. And again, like I said, I think it's hilarious that when they went to Lyoko, they saw the tarantula and the two cankerlites as Sissy and her and Nicholas and Herb, which I thought was amusing. But again, it's so otherwise it is an amusing and interesting premise. I just wish we could have seen more with it. I feel like it could have been a little bit more, is what I'm saying. Like I feel like I feel like that it would have been kind of more interesting if Urkinod had gotten out on their own, but without Aelita and Yumi helping them, and them just causing chaos around town until they managed to intercept them and rush them to the factory. And I understand. Wait, 20 like it's 22 minutes, so they have to pick and choose what they can and can't do. I just feel like that we could have seen more with that. And likewise, I feel like we could have seen more like in Lyoko, though at that point they would have been more of a hindrance. I just kind of wish they had that like aha moment as well too. Like just someone explain to them, look, something is wrong with you. Xana's messed with your head. The closest thing we get to that is Aelita pretty much telling them, look, you guys shut up and do what I say, all right? I just wish that they had actually said, look, something is wrong. Something is wrong with you guys. Xana messed with your heads. We're not in Lyoko. We're in the real world. Or likewise, we're not in the real world. We're in Lyoko. I feel like there could have been more with that. Otherwise, it is still. Otherwise, what we do see with it is interesting and kind of funny. Just kind of seeing. I like just seeing how they react to everything, how they treat everything like they're in a life or death situation, or even how they're willing to kind of still roll with it when Aelita and Yumi come and rescue them. Because again, they're people they trust and they're still rushing somewhere. It makes sense, especially like that when Yumi does get a word from Jeremy about the monster attacking Lyoko's core. They don't bat an eye because again, from their perspective, they're in Lyoko. But I don't know. Can't really think of much else to say about the episode. It's filler. I could make another joke about school teacher Rick being here, but actually, that was kind of amusing. How because when they started going insane, it was during one of the rehearsals for his plays. And what I found kind of amusing is that they had to reuse the Romeo and Juliet sets because they didn't have a big enough budget, so they had to just use what they could and find a play that happened to have a balcony on it. So that's kind of amusing. In fact, when they actually start going crazy and hallucinating their Lyoko, the guy's actually all for it, so because he thinks it's just avant-garde acting or whatever. So that's amusing, but yeah, I can't really think of much else to say for this episode. It's nice, it's fine, it's just filler. I feel like they could have done more with it, but what they had, it was amusing, just some simple, silly fun. So yeah, that's about it. Sorry I didn't have much else to say, but that's it. Just an amusing episode, nothing much else. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson. I'll see you next week. Take care.